The world is not fair. And the sooner you accept this brutal truth, the sooner you can stop being its victim and start becoming its master. Let me tell you about the moment everything changed for me. I used to be that guy who had all the right answers, but no one listened. I was the one who played by all the rules while watching others break them and somehow win. I was competent, reliable, always there when people needed me. But here's what nobody tells you about being the good guy. The world doesn't reward fairness. It rewards power. I spent years believing that if I just worked hard enough, if I was just kind enough, if I was just smart enough, people would naturally respect me. They would see my value. They would give me the recognition I deserved. And you know what happened? I got taken advantage of, overlooked, dismissed. While people with half my skills and twice my ruthlessness climbed higher, earned more, commanded rooms I couldn't even get into. Then I discovered something that changed everything. Something that Machiavelli understood 500 years ago, and something that the most powerful people in your life right now understand perfectly. Emotional intelligence isn't about being nice. It's about being strategically aware. It's about understanding the psychological game that everyone is playing whether you realize it or not. And once you understand these 7 ruthless lessons, you'll never see human interactions the same way again. You'll never be able to play the victim, because you'll understand exactly how the game works. Here's the first lesson that will completely shift your perspective. Fairness is a psychological trap designed to keep you compliant. Let me explain what I mean. Every time you hear someone say, "That's not fair," what they're really saying is, "I don't have the power to change this situation." Fairness is the language of the powerless. It's what people appeal to when they have no other leverage. Think about your own life. When was the last time someone with real power over you complained about fairness? Your boss doesn't talk about fairness when they give promotions. They talk about results. Your most successful friends don't obsess over whether life is treating everyone equally. They focus on positioning themselves to win regardless of the playing field. Machiavelli understood this principle perfectly. He wrote that a prince must learn to be unfair when fairness would destroy him. Not because he's evil, but because the world operates on power dynamics, not moral abstractions. And here's what's crucial to understand. I'm not telling you to be unfair to everyone all the time. I'm telling you to stop being fair with people who aren't fair to you. This is where most people get stuck. They operate under this childhood fantasy that if they just play by the rules, everyone else will too. They stay loyal to disloyal people. They stay honest with manipulators. They stay generous with takers. And then they wonder why they feel drained, undervalued, and psychologically dominated. The shift happens when you realize that fairness is not a principle you follow universally. It's a tool you use strategically. You be fair with people who reciprocate. You be fair with people who respect boundaries. But the moment someone shows you they're playing a different game, you adjust. Not out of revenge, not out of emotion, but out of pure strategic clarity. Let me give you a real example. Imagine you have a colleague who constantly takes credit for your ideas. You've been fair. You've shared your thoughts openly in meetings. You've trusted them. But every single time, they present your concepts as their own. Most people in this situation keep being fair because they think eventually karma will catch up or someone will notice. That's victim thinking. The strategically intelligent response. You stop sharing your full ideas with them. You give them incomplete information. You let them present something that makes them look unprepared. You don't announce what you're doing. You don't make it dramatic. You just quietly adjust your behavior to match their integrity level. That's not being mean. That's being psychologically sophisticated. Here's where things get controversial. When most people hear the word ruthless, they think cruel. They think heartless. They think villain. But that's not what ruthlessness actually means in the context of real power. Ruthlessness is emotional discipline. It's the ability to make decisions based on reality rather than how you wish reality was. Let me share something personal. I used to keep people in my life long after they stopped adding value. Friends who only called when they needed something. Romantic interests who kept me as a backup option. Business relationships that drained my energy and gave nothing back. And I kept them around because I felt guilty. Because I didn't want to be the bad guy. Because I was afraid of being seen as cold. Then I realized something that set me free. Your emotional comfort is not my responsibility to maintain at the expense of my own progress. Read that again. This is the shift from victim to predator mindset. Predator doesn't mean evil. It means someone who takes responsibility for their own survival and success rather than waiting for the world to be kind. Ruthlessness, real ruthlessness, looks like this. You have an employee who's a great person but consistently underperforms. Everyone likes them. They have a good story. They try hard. But the results aren't there. The emotionally undisciplined leader keeps them because firing them feels mean. The ruthless leader removes them because keeping them hurts the team, the business, and honestly, the person themselves who needs to find a role they can actually succeed in. You have a friend who constantly brings drama, negativity, and chaos into your life. The emotionally undisciplined person keeps engaging because they feel sorry for them or they've known them for years. The ruthless person creates distance because their peace matters more than maintaining a toxic connection out of obligation. Notice what ruthlessness actually is. It's putting results over feelings. It's valuing outcomes over comfort. It's refusing to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. And here's the part nobody tells you. Being ruthless in this way actually makes you more emotionally intelligent, not less. Because you're making decisions based on clear assessment of reality rather than guilt, fear, or wishful thinking. This is the lesson that will make you deeply uncomfortable, but it's also the one that will change your life faster than anything else. Being liked is dramatically less valuable than being respected. And in most cases, you can't have both at the same level. I'll never forget the moment I understood this. I was in a meeting with about 12 people. There was one guy who barely spoke. When he did speak, he wasn't warm. He wasn't funny. He didn't try to make people comfortable. But when he talked, the entire room went silent. Every head turned. Every person leaned in. He had something nobody else had. Psychological dominance. Now compare that to another person in the same meeting who was charming, friendly, told great stories, made everyone laugh. People liked him. But when he spoke, people half listened. They smiled and nodded, but they didn't change their behavior based on his input. He was liked, but not respected. He was entertaining, but not influential. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of you are optimizing for likability when you should be optimizing for respect. You're worried about being too direct because someone might think you're rude. You're softening your opinions because you don't want to create conflict. You're agreeing with things you don't actually agree with because you want to be included in the social circle. And what you're building is a reputation as someone pleasant, but ultimately powerless. Someone nice, but not necessary. Someone people enjoy having around, but don't actually think about when important decisions are being made. Machiavelli wrote that it's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Modern interpretation? It's better to be respected than liked if you can't have both. Because likability without respect makes you a social accessory. Respect without likability makes you a force people have to consider. Let me be clear. I'm not saying be an asshole. I'm not saying treat people poorly. I'm saying stop managing everyone's emotional comfort at the expense of your own psychological positioning. Stop avoiding necessary confrontations because you're afraid someone won't like you anymore. Stop diluting your message because you're worried about offending someone. Think about the people in your life who have real influence over you. Are they the nicest people you know? Or are they the people who maintain clear boundaries, communicate directly, and don't apologize for having standards? Chances are it's the latter. You might not always enjoy interacting with them, but you respect them, and that respect translates into influence. Here's how this plays out practically. Someone asks you to do something that doesn't serve you. The likability-focused response is to say yes and then resent them later. The respect-focused response is to say no clearly and move on. One makes you pleasant. The other makes you powerful. Someone challenges your idea in public. The likability-focused response is to soften your position and try to find middle ground so everyone feels good. The respect-focused response is to defend your position with evidence and conviction, letting disagreement exist without needing everyone to be comfortable. You'll notice that the most successful people you know have a particular quality. They're comfortable with not being liked by everyone. They've made peace with the fact that having strong opinions, clear boundaries, and high standards means some people won't enjoy their company. And they're okay with that, because they'd rather have 5 people who deeply respect them than 50 people who vaguely like them. Here's a pattern you've probably noticed, but never named. The person who makes the decision controls the situation. Not the smartest person, not the most experienced person. The person who acts while everyone else is still thinking. This is one of Machiavelli's most powerful insights. Indecision is perceived as weakness even when it comes from careful consideration. The person who hesitates, who needs more time, who wants to think it over, is psychologically positioning themselves as subordinate to whoever is willing to act. Let me show you how this works in real life. You're in a group of friends trying to decide where to eat. Everyone's going back and forth, suggesting options, asking what everyone else wants. Then one person says, "We're going to this place. I'm heading there now. Join if you want." What happens? Most of the group follows. Not because it's the best option, not because everyone deeply wanted that choice, but because decisiveness creates a psychological gravity that pulls people in. This happens in business constantly. 2 people pitch similar ideas to a boss. One person presents the idea and then asks what the boss thinks, leaving the decision open. The other person presents the idea and then says, "I'm starting implementation on Monday. Let me know if you need anything from me to make it happen." Same idea, completely different psychological positioning. The second person is operating from authority. The first person is operating from permission. Here's what most people don't understand. Confidence isn't something you feel and then act on. It's something you build by acting before you feel ready. Every time you make a decision while others hesitate, you're training yourself to be the person who leads. You're building psychological superiority not through arrogance, but through demonstrated willingness to take responsibility for outcomes. Now, I'm not telling you to make reckless decisions. I'm telling you that in most situations, a good decision made quickly is better than a perfect decision made slowly. Because while you're optimizing for perfection, someone else is taking action and learning from real results. They're building momentum. They're positioning themselves as the person who gets things done. Think about your social circles. Who decides where the group goes? Who chooses the movie? Who sets the date for the gathering? It's not usually the most popular person. It's the person willing to make the call while everyone else waits for consensus that never comes. This principle applies to everything: asking someone out, launching a business, ending a relationship that's not working, taking a job opportunity, investing in yourself. The person who acts while others deliberate wins, not because their decision was necessarily better, but because they moved while others stayed stuck in analysis. Here's the shift in thinking. Stop waiting for certainty before you act. Start acting your way to certainty. Stop asking for permission from people who don't have authority over you. Start operating from the assumption that you're capable of making good decisions and adjusting if needed. This next lesson is going to challenge everything you believe about authenticity. How people perceive you matters infinitely more than who you actually are. I know that sounds cynical. I know it contradicts all the self-help advice about being yourself. But here's the truth. Your authentic self doesn't mean anything if nobody perceives it correctly. Machiavelli understood this better than almost anyone. He wrote that it's not necessary for a prince to have all good qualities, but it's absolutely necessary to appear to have them. Because people judge based on appearances. They make decisions based on perception. They give power, respect, and opportunities to people they perceive as deserving, not people who secretly are deserving but don't know how to demonstrate it. Let me give you a personal example. Early in my career, I was incredibly competent. I worked longer hours than everyone else. I produced better results. I had more knowledge, but I was invisible. Nobody knew what I was doing because I believed that good work speaks for itself. That's a beautiful lie we tell ourselves to avoid the uncomfortable reality that marketing yourself matters as much as the actual work. Then I watched someone with half my skill level get promoted twice in the time it took me to get noticed once. And you know what they were doing differently? They were managing perception. They made sure the right people knew about their wins. They spoke up in meetings even when they didn't have the perfect answer. They positioned their small victories as significant contributions. They weren't more skilled. They were more visible. This is where most people get stuck. They think managing perception means being fake. They think it means lying about who you are. But that's not what perception management actually means. It means being intentional about how you present the truth. It means understanding that people are going to form an opinion about you whether you guide that opinion or not, so you might as well guide it. Here's how this works in practice. You accomplish something significant at work. The passive approach is to hope your boss notices. The perception management approach is to send a brief email framing the accomplishment in terms of business impact and client value. Same truth, different visibility. You're at a networking event. The authentic approach is to just be yourself and hope people see your value. The perception management approach is to prepare 3 interesting conversation starters that position you as someone knowledgeable and worth staying connected to. You're not lying. You're strategically presenting the most compelling version of the truth. You're dating someone you really like. The completely open approach is to show all your interest immediately and hope they appreciate your honesty. The perception management approach is to show interest while also demonstrating that you have options and standards. You're not playing games. You're understanding that perceived value influences actual value in relationships. Here's the key insight. Perception management isn't about deception. It's about curation. It's understanding that you are constantly communicating messages about your value, competence, and status through hundreds of small choices. How quickly you respond to messages, how you dress, what you talk about, who you're seen with, how you handle conflict, what you post on social media, how much space you take up in conversations. Most people communicate these messages unconsciously and then wonder why they're not getting the respect, opportunities, or relationships they want. Powerful people understand that every interaction is an opportunity to reinforce the perception they want others to have. Here's a lesson that will make you see every conversation differently. Whoever controls the story controls the reality, not the truth. The story. Because in human psychology, the story people believe is more powerful than what actually happened. Think about the last time you had a conflict with someone. What happened afterwards? Both of you went to other people and told your version of events. Your version made you look reasonable and them look unreasonable. Their version did the opposite. And here's what matters. The people who heard your version first, told most compellingly, believed you. The narrative shaped their perception of reality more than the facts. Machiavelli knew this intimately. He watched as political leaders rose and fell not based on their actual competence, but based on the stories people told about them. The leader who controlled the narrative controlled public perception. The leader who lost narrative control lost power, even if they were objectively better. This happens in your life constantly, and most of you aren't even aware of it. Someone at work makes a mistake that involves you. If they get to your boss first with their version, framing it as a communication breakdown or misunderstanding, they've set the narrative. When you show up later with your perspective, you're now defending against their story rather than presenting neutral facts. You break up with someone. If they tell the friend group first, they get to frame the narrative. You were emotionally unavailable. You changed, you didn't appreciate them. By the time you engage, the story is already set. People have already formed an opinion. You're not explaining what happened. You're fighting against an established narrative. Here's the shift. Stop assuming the truth will speak for itself. It won't. Start proactively managing the narrative before someone else does. When something significant happens, think about who needs to hear your perspective and make sure they hear it first, clearly, and framed in a way that positions you correctly. This doesn't mean lying. This means understanding that facts don't interpret themselves. People interpret facts through stories. And if you're not providing the story, someone else will. And their story will serve their interests, not yours. Here's the final lesson. And it's the one that separates people who are respected from people who are liked, but ignored. Your words mean nothing without consequences. Authority doesn't come from what you say. It comes from what you do when your boundaries are tested. Think about the people in your life who have real authority over you. It's not because they talk about their standards. It's because they enforce them. They said they would do something if you crossed a line, and then they actually did it. That follow-through created psychological weight behind their future words. Now think about people in your life who have no authority despite trying to. They threaten consequences they never enforce. They set boundaries they don't maintain. They make statements about what they will and won't tolerate, and then they tolerate everything. What happens? Their words become meaningless. People learn that they can ignore them without any real cost. This is where most people destroy their own power. They communicate expectations without enforcement mechanisms. They tell people what they want without showing people what happens when those wants are ignored. And then they wonder why nobody takes them seriously. Let me give you a concrete example. You have a friend who constantly flakes on plans. You tell them it bothers you. They apologize. They say it won't happen again. It happens again. You tell them again. They apologize again. And the cycle continues. Why? Because there's no consequence. Your words have emotional weight, but no behavioral impact. The authoritative response looks completely different. I value our friendship, but I'm not going to keep making plans that you don't respect. Next time you cancel last minute without a real reason, I'm going to stop initiating plans. You'll need to reach out and prove through consistent action that you value my time. And then, critically, You actually do it. What happens? One of two things. Either they adjust their behavior because they realize there's an actual cost to disrespecting your time, or they don't, and you've successfully filtered someone out of your life who wasn't respecting you anyway. Either outcome is better than the endless cycle of disappointment and resentment. This applies to every area of life. You're a manager and an employee keeps missing deadlines. Talking to them without consequences teaches them that deadlines are suggestions. Talking to them and then implementing a clear progressive consequence system, verbal warning, written warning, performance plan, termination, creates real authority. They know exactly what happens if behavior doesn't change. You're dating someone who keeps crossing boundaries you've communicated. Expressing how it makes you feel without being willing to leave teaches them that your boundaries are negotiable. Expressing your boundary once clearly and then ending the relationship if it's crossed again shows that you're serious. Here's the principle. People will treat you exactly as badly as you let them. Your tolerance level becomes their standard. If you accept disrespect, you will receive disrespect. If you accept mediocrity, you will receive mediocrity. If you accept being a backup option, you will remain a backup option. The shift to authority happens when you stop managing people's feelings about your boundaries and start enforcing your boundaries regardless of their feelings. You're not being mean. You're being clear. You're not being harsh. You're being consistent. You're teaching people through actions, not words, what you will and won't accept. Machiavelli wrote that cruelty well used is better than mercy poorly used. Modern translation: clear consequences consistently applied are kinder than empty threats that create confusion and resentment. Because when people know exactly where the lines are and exactly what happens when they cross them, they can make informed choices. Your inconsistency is what actually hurts people because they never know what to expect. Here's the final and perhaps most sophisticated lesson. The most powerful people in any room are usually the quietest. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand that true power doesn't need to announce itself. Think about every interaction you've ever had with someone who had real authority. A professor who commanded respect. A boss who had genuine leadership. Someone whose opinion actually mattered in decision-making. Did they dominate conversations? Did they constantly remind people of their credentials? Did they need to be the center of attention? Probably not. They spoke when they had something valuable to say. They listened more than they talked. They asked questions that revealed understanding. And when they did speak, people listened completely because their words carried weight earned through strategic silence. Compare that to people who have no real power but desperately want it. They talk constantly. They interrupt. They need to be involved in every conversation. They remind you of their accomplishments. They can't stand silence or not being the focus. And ironically, all of that behavior signals insecurity and low status. Here's what I learned that changed everything for me. Your need to speak is inversely proportional to your actual authority. The more you need to talk, the less power you actually have. The more comfortable you are with silence, the more psychological space you command. Let me show you what this looks like practically. You're in a meeting and someone proposes an idea you disagree with. The low-power response is to immediately jump in with your objection, showing everyone you have an opinion. The high-power response is to let them finish completely, let other people respond, and then, only if necessary, offer a single question that exposes the flaw in their logic. You didn't argue. You didn't lecture. You asked one strategic question and let the room reach the conclusion themselves. You're in a social situation and someone says something controversial or tries to provoke you. The reactive response is to defend yourself or engage immediately. The dominant response is to simply look at them, pause for a moment, and then either address it with complete calm or ignore it entirely and change the subject. Your refusal to react gives you power. Their need for your reaction reveals their lack of it. Someone is talking about their accomplishments, subtly competing with you for status in the conversation. The insecure response is to match their story with your own achievements. The powerful response is to genuinely acknowledge what they've done and ask a thoughtful question about it. You're not competing. You're so secure in your own value that you can be generous with attention. That generosity from a position of strength is more impressive than any story you could tell about yourself. Here's the core insight. Silence is not emptiness. It's space. It's weight. It's the psychological equivalent of taking up room without apology. When you speak less, your words matter more. When you react less, your reactions have more impact. When you need attention less, you command attention more. Machiavelli understood this deeply. The most dangerous political players weren't the ones making grand speeches. They were the ones observing, calculating, speaking rarely but with precision. They understood that power whispered is more effective than power shouted. So here we are. 7 ruthless lessons that most people will hear and immediately reject because they're too uncomfortable. Because they challenge the fairy tale we've been sold about how the world works. Because they require you to take responsibility for your psychological positioning instead of blaming circumstances. Let me tell you what happens if you actually implement these principles. You stop being the person things happen to. You become the person who makes things happen. You stop seeking permission and start operating from authority. You stop managing everyone's comfort and start protecting your own peace. You stop hoping people will see your value and start making it impossible to ignore. But here's the warning nobody gives you. Once you see the game, you can't unsee it. Once you understand these dynamics, you'll notice them everywhere. You'll see exactly how people are trying to manipulate you. You'll recognize when someone is testing your boundaries. You'll understand the power plays happening in every interaction. And you'll never be able to go back to the innocent belief that everyone is playing fair. This knowledge makes you powerful, but it also makes you responsible. Because now you can't claim ignorance. You can't play victim. You know exactly what's happening and exactly what you need to do about it. The question is, will you? I want you to do something right now. Write this in the comments. I refuse to be psychologically dominated by others. I take full responsibility for my positioning, my boundaries, and my power. Write it because the act of declaring it publicly starts the psychological shift. You're not just learning information. You're making a commitment to operate differently. Subscribe to this channel because these lessons are just the beginning. The people who understand psychological dominance are building the life you want while you're still trying to be liked by everyone. Every day you delay implementing this is another day someone more ruthless is taking the opportunities, respect, and influence you deserve. The world is not fair, but now you know how it actually works. Now you have the tools. The only question left is, what are you going to do with them?